Good morning. So, I wanted to record a little video because I've had a few people recently ask me about spirituality and them starting a new spiritual path in life. And I've been on one for a very long time. We all have, really. But people have asked me a lot about, what my spiritual journey has been like, how I've navigated it, so to speak. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about my take on spirituality because everybody's is so different. And one of the things that I have noticed in my time focused on my spiritual growth is that there are so many different perspectives on spirituality. And so for me, when I was very young, I received a little bit of, insight or wisdom into a spiritual life or a spiritual path and following life from the soul depths and sort of the place within me that felt true when I would hear a piece of insight or information. So what I mean by that is anytime I ever received a piece of wisdom or an insight, and if it felt true to me in my core, then I would follow that. And it became a piece of my own philosophy or part of my next step. So, you could read so many different kind of spiritual texts, but they might not necessarily resonate with you, and then that's okay. You can move on, or you might read a little bit from this book, or like something from this speaker, or have an insight in a meditation, and it feel true for you, and some of it might not. So you take a little bit of what felt true, and you leave the rest. So for me, through reading, lots of meditation, surrounding myself with material and exposing myself to different kinds of speakers and leaders in the spiritual community. When I was younger, that had started in more of a psychic realm. With meditation and meditating to connect to my spirit guides, or essentially, the helpers that came here with me. But so I had originally started with Sylvia Browne and a lot of her teachings, and read a lot of her books and had a lot of her perspective, and that's really where I had started to understand the concept of what a soul was, and that we're not just a physical body, that there's something within us that is formless, is something that is constantly evolving, is something that never dies, is something that only ever evolves and lives on, and is infinite. And I had followed many different kind of teachers over the last few years of my life, and some of the biggest ones for me have been Wayne Dyer. Dr. Wayne Dyer has been a huge influence in me, and a lot of his work really resonated with me and felt really true. And then I also would follow Eckhart Tolle, and I would follow his work, but even his material at one point was just so over my head, and I couldn't actually comprehend a lot of his work until I was ready. So Eckhart Tolle, for example, had come into my life when I was ready to live more in the present moment. So when I had said to myself, I was getting really caught up in my life not working out the way that it was supposed to, so I had decided that I needed to live more in the present moment. And then shortly after that, Eckhart Tolle's work came into my life. So when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And that's a big thing that I've tried to also follow in my own life, is that, if there's a certain piece of material or a certain level of awareness coming in, then it's time for me to follow, it's time for me to move into that or learn from that. So spirituality to me has always been to follow what feels true for you. If something feels true, even if it doesn't resonate with other people, to continue to follow it in yourself. You don't have to have a whole group of people coming with you. You can go into something alone, and that can be really scary. So there are communities, and there are other people out there that kind of think the same way that you can, reach out to. And then even for that, there was a part of my growth within the last probably year or two where I wasn't really in a lot of community work, and I just kind of went inside myself to do a lot of really deep core work. And so also the spirituality aspect to that is to go really deep inside yourself, to not seek it from a whole bunch of different kind of teachers or leaders or materialistic things, to try not to grasp onto so many other things, but to go within yourself and to do a lot of your own deep spiritual work. So when I had first started, it was a lot of teachers and speakers and leaders and reading and the meditation for sure has always been there, because it does take you into yourself and makes you get really quiet. So for a period of time, I had followed into that, and I would go, the next teacher, the next teacher, the next teacher, the next teacher, which has served its purpose. I had gotten me to a place in my life where I was reaching out to the same coaches, because I knew that there was something bigger for me. And as I would read these different books or expose myself to different material, I knew and I could feel within me that trueness that there was something bigger for me. But there was something holding me back. And that something holding me back was always just myself. And it was my own belief patterns, my own fears that held me back. And I knew that the only way that I could get out of that was through myself. That a lot of that I had to go into and dissect and kind of pull apart. And a lot of people, that's scary to do that, because when we go into the most hurtful areas of our life, we don't feel really good about it, right? So we don't like to go there. And I know people, who work a lot and work all the time, because once they get quiet, the thoughts come in and the thoughts can really take them over and they get really emotional. And so they find something to keep them busy. Whereas most of the time when I start to feel that come up, I kind of try to dive right into it and figure out what it's all about. And that was how there was a part of me where this fear of rejection had come up, but it didn't come up until I started feeling like, a lot of anxiety about a situation and wondering what it was all about. Was scared that, I wasn't good enough and that I would get, and that was another pattern, maybe that I wasn't good enough and that I was going to be rejected because I wasn't good enough. So that fear of rejection had come up, but only through my own, want to go deep into why I was feeling the way that I was feeling. And I think that's a big part of spirituality, is why do we do the things that you do? Not why everyone else does the things that they do. Why do you do the things that you do? Why do you say the things that you say? Why do you think the way that you think? Why do you act the way that you act? Why do you not act the way that you want to act is another one too. And why am I so scared of what I think other people are going to think about me? So there's so many different aspects to the self and to the soul. And when you start to kind of step back and look at yourself or look at your life, and you really ask, like, am I really happy here? Is this really what I want? Those are kind of the questions that kind of help you go deep within yourself, the big questions. And I had gotten to a place in my life where, I thought it was going to go in a certain direction. And I was fighting really hard to make it go that way, because that was absolute. I was supposed to, be with someone. We were supposed to get married. We were supposed to have children. I was supposed to be a wife. I was supposed to be a mom, an amazing, daughter, sister, mother, wife, all of these different stages. And not to say that that won't come up for me at some point. But I had gotten to this place where I was fighting so hard to make this, this reality come to fruition, and it wasn't happening. And I finally said to myself, if I'm not going to be this, if I'm not going to be, a wife, if I'm not going to be a mom right now, who am I? And I had gone at that point in my life through a little bit of an identity crisis. I remember feeling when I would speak in front of groups of people about something, that there was this part of me that didn't really know who I was as I was talking to these people. It felt very empty, like there was this empty exchange. And I'm a very heart-to-heart kind of person, and in those moments I would feel very closed off, like it was hard to really kind of connect to them. And I started to feel like maybe it was because, maybe I didn't really know who I was. And then around that same time was feeling this frustration around my reality not fitting this mold that I was trying so hard to make it. And when I asked myself that question, who am I if I'm not going to be a wife, a mom, when I asked myself that question, if you're not going to be that, then who are you? It was like the universe, or powers that be, had said, that's a really good question, Stacey. Let's figure that out. And that, from that moment, I mean, that triggered a really big spiritual growth phase, or even an awakening phase, back in about 2014, 2013, 2014, even maybe 2012. It probably was starting around then if I go back in my journal. So there was a big part of it that I felt a lot of my life wasn't really fitting, what I wanted or what I felt it was supposed to be. But I started to really question the whole thing. I questioned who I was within all of this, within all of that life, and what it was that I really wanted if this wasn't going to work out. And as I started to ask myself those really deep questions, it kind of took me to a whole other level of awareness. So when I asked myself that question, who am I if I'm not this? It was almost like I elevated in a sense to like this next level where I could see things a lot differently, this new level of awareness that I could see things from a new height. And I started to look at my own behaviors and my own patterns, and I had to invest into myself to go really deep into Stacy to figure out what was actually holding me back and what was stopping me from being able to have honest, deep, genuine, authentic connection to myself before anything, but to other people, and why I felt like I was surrounded by all these people all of a sudden that I couldn't really trust or talk to, or if I wanted to have that kind of a conversation, I had to reach out to one specific human being. I wasn't surrounded with a lot of that genuine, authentic human beingness that I feel like we're missing a lot of right now. And one of the reasons why I do a lot of the work, which has evolved in itself in my childcare center, is about seeing these children as individual beings with their own learning needs and their own base for learning, and to be encouraged in their individuality and their authenticity from a very young age, and create a beautiful space in order for them to learn, and their potential not be hung up on their academics, but on more than their academics, on who they are as an individual and what makes them special and genuine. And anyway, so that's another phase that has evolved out of my life. It was part of a piece that came together in this search for who is Stacy and what is that. And when I was a young child, I had a really hard time in school. Academically, I wasn't really at the top of my class. I was more of a social bee. And I remember one of my teachers would say, Stacy forgets why she comes to school sometimes. And I'm still kind of like that. But if, a lot of who you are is hung up on your academics, I was not a very academically, smart child at the time. Or I was, and felt that because I wasn't living up to this idea for other people, I just kind of stopped. I just kind of stopped caring. If everything was hung up on my academics, I wasn't going to make everybody happy. So I just kind of, I think, went by the wayside. And that's okay. But there was more to me than just my academics. And some people would see that in my athletics and, in my sports, and really encourage me in that sense in my leadership. But as far as academics went, I just kind of went by the wayside. And there's a part of me that, has become what I needed when I was a kid, was to be seen for more than my academic potential, to be seen for my individuality, and to be encouraged and encourage other children in that, and what makes them so unique and so authentic. So on this search for, who are you if you're not going to be this, a really big piece of me has come out on the other side. And it took a lot of rumbling and it took a lot of action. And even still to this day, there's moments that I know I have fear get in my way. There's lots of fear still on really putting myself out there and sharing what I have to offer. And it's going to come. It's all going to come in due time. So I just thought I'd share that, a little bit of what spirituality means to me, following what feels true to you, following what feels right for you, even if it doesn't mean it's right for somebody else. I think we all have our own individual ways to finding our wholeness within us. And to really go deep into yourself first before anybody else, to go deep into yourself and ask yourself, the big questions: who am I? And also, why do I do the things that I do? Why do I feel the way that I feel? And to really go into that work. And for me, there was a lot of that was inner child work that needed some healing, and inner teens, inner, early young adulthood, and even into my 30s. So and to, open up to spiritual leaders and reading different material. And it all really goes in here to yourself. And meditation is great for that. It helps quiet the noise down, because I think a lot of us feel so much noise in here, which is why we don't stop. We just go, 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 so we don't have to hear it. And a lot of the noise up there is really bad self-talk, a lot of judgment, a lot of self-judgment, not a lot of self-compassion, which is a big part of meditation, is when you get quiet and you just focus on breathing. Anytime you get distracted, to just say, oh, better just start over, new breath. Don't beat yourself down about it. Just one conscious breath at a time. And how one question really triggered my, spiritual growth or awakening phase. And a big part of that awakening phase was a life that I had created that started to fall apart. It started to deconstruct so that I could find out what it was I really wanted and what it was that I really wanted to create for myself. And I just thought that I kind of should share that today. So if you want to connect or reach out, if you're going through a similar experience where you start to feel that your life is kind of, changing, or you want to change, reach out to me, because you're not alone. And it can be a scary process when you start to look at your life from a different awareness or a different level of perception. When you hadn't really seen it before, even though it was always present to you, you're just starting to see things a little bit differently. So don't be scared and just reach out. And there's lots of people out there who are going through this currently, I think. And I love you through your experience. Love yourself through your experience. And we'll talk soon.